Part 2, Surviving the Summer of Love, Haight-Ashbury. So I in the country with my dad and we're living up there, but I left out something that was a big deal. Um, from the day I came back from the hospital, every day, every night when I would go to sleep, um, I would be traveling in my baby crib, and I had a silver cord attached to my baby crib, and I would fly around in my baby crib with the handle, and it was like a magic carpet. And I flew to so many different worlds. I can't even count them all. And there were so many different beings, and they weren't human. There were so many different animals, and they weren't animals from this planet. I travel every night on my baby crib, flying, astral traveling through the universe, and I am traveling every night to these different galaxies, and colors were amazing, and the creatures were not from this planet. I can't even put them in words. There were so many different galaxies and planets and beings. I move up to Humboldt with my dad, and I leave my baby crib there. So whenever I fly every night, I have a silver cord attached to my belly button, attached to my bed, and I fly around. And it is pretty crazy because I am traveling constantly, and I don't sleep much. I mean, I go to sleep at night, normal time for little kids, but I'm up early in the morning, every morning at like 4 a.m., 5 a.m., every morning. And then I would, when I was living at home, I would wake up and go watch cartoons. That was what I like to do. But when I moved up to the country, we didn't have a TV. And another thing I left out is that I was super psychic, and I could read people by just looking into their eyes, and I could always see different things in my future or people's futures. But the crazy thing is, I don't have control of it. It happens when it wants to, and it's a trip. I try to tell people about it, people close to me, and people don't want to hear it. When you tell them that you're in a different reality every night and that you are psychic and stuff is going on, people are like, hey, we don't want to hear it. They would literally cover their ears. Oh, we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that. Anything that people would hear that messes what they are programmed to think is normal, scares people. So I was really tripping people out. They were tripping on me. And literally, I would see people, and then I would talk to them, and then I would tell them things. And later in life, people would tell me, they're like, boy, you told me all kinds of stuff about myself, and it all came true. And they call me the Oracle. A lot of my friends and people that were close to me, they're like, oh, wow, Patrick, the Oracle. But it was nothing that I asked for, and it's nothing that I'm bragging about. It just was. And it got pretty strong. I would go around the water, like rivers, or when I would go down to San Francisco around the bay or the ocean, the water would start to dance. All the atoms in the water would start to like shimmer and like vibrate. When I would go to the river would be like, the water would be like alive around me and vibrating. I started having really strong connections with nature, and I try to tell people about it, and everyone was like, hey, don't tell people about that stuff. We don't want to hear that stuff. And my dad would say, wow, you're super powerful. You don't even realize. He goes, someday you'll realize. And that's another thing. I wanted to talk about my dad. Before this happened, my dad was hanging out with following yogis with his good friend Charlie Brown and his friend Fred. And they would travel around and they would go hang out with the yogis. They were always going to see yogis and taking a lot of LSD, and they would get really high and be meditating and seeing these yogis. They would hang out with eventually my dad found a yogi, and it was Swami Satchidananda, and he came from the lineage of Sri Swami Shivananda. But my dad was pretty into seeing yogis and hanging out with yogis. He was always doing that when I was growing up and checking out music. He also was friends with Baba Ramdas, who was Richard Alpark. And later in his life, he was like, Ramdas is my yogi. And that's who he followed, the teachings of Ramdas. And I didn't really understand it. He always tell me, be here now, be here now, be in present time. And a lot of stuff he told me when I was a little kid, I would always say, that's not for me. I don't believe in that stuff. But I was definitely awake. Something was going on inside my brain that was a chemical reaction to the LSD. It got pretty strong in my life, and I'll talk more about that later, but I started to have magical experiences that were supernatural. And what I mean by supernatural is I would think of certain animals or think of things, and all of a sudden they would happen. I would think of animals and they would show up. And when I tell some stories about some of my animal experiences, it'll blow your mind. Everything that I'm telling you is true on my life, on my children's lives. I'm not making any of this up. This is all real. And I was experiencing it. I didn't ask for it. It just happened to me. Getting into that much LSD at 3 years old switched something in my brain. And I was always different. I was a trip. I trip people out. Especially when you start telling people things and then they come true. And people are like, whoa. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to know about their future. They don't want to know stuff. And I didn't do it on purpose. I would just talk and stuff would come out of me. And my whole life was really magical. And that's why I named my webpage Pw.Magiclife. But my whole life, I had a company called Magic Life, and I had a different business called Magic Life. And I didn't mean magic like witchcraft magic, not at all. The magic I meant is like the magic of the universe. Everything is so magical. And I was having a hard time in my life. I really went deep into it, and it kind of, when everybody is not seeing what you're seeing, it can kind of make you a little like think you're like crazy. But I know I wasn't crazy. It was really happening to me, and I was like, I didn't understand it. I mean, the magic got so strong later part in my life that I prayed for it to quit, and it stopped. But I'm going to tell up until that time, and that went on into my 30s. And not too long back in the last 4 or 5 years, I'm like, I want the magic back in my life. And so I started talking to God and asking for the magic to turn back on. Right now, I'm hoping this video helps people. I'm not saying go out and do drugs, do LSD. I'm just saying there's a different reality and there's different dimensions, infinite. So watch what you get into. And I definitely wouldn't promote ever giving kids anything except love. What happened to me was a freak accident. My dad did not give it to me. Some people in the comments said, oh, he maybe gave it to you. No, he did not give it to me. He did not want to deal with what came with it. And, me and my dad in the country, when we moved up there, we were really close. He treated me like an equal. We were best friends for a while. So we lived in this little lean-to that he made, and this goes on for 2 or 3 years, and I'm in the country just having crazy magic in my life and magical experiences, and I'm like, it's like I'm high the whole time. I never stop being high. When I told people, oh yeah, I've been high the whole time, I've been high the whole time. Even right now I feel high. I'm looking at the camera and I'm looking at the sky behind me, and I'm like, wow, how magical. Everything is magic. I started to have a hard time in my life when I got a little older, and I started talking to God, and because my dad told me, connect with God, that can help you. So I started talking to God like I'm talking to you guys right now, and God started talking back to me through the animals, through the elements, through the ocean. And when I start telling some of the stories, they're really hard to believe. And I still have a hard time believing in myself. And I always ask, why me? Why me? And then I'm like, well, I guess this is God's plan. I've been super lucky. I've been super blessed. I've been so fortunate to have these magical experiences with God. And I am not religious. I do believe in God, and I believe there's good and bad. Who do you choose to be? Who do you want to be? And I realize at this point in my life that helping people, using your body as an instrument, if you connect with God, God will come through you and help people, and you can heal, you can teach, you can do all kinds of things. It's endless. I'm not saying I'm a healer, and I'm not saying I'm wise. I just got into a lot of LSD, and it actually did open my mind. And I've been pretty smart because of it in some ways, and in other ways I'm kind of like you know, a lot of people are looking at the picture from this side, and I'm looking at it from this side. It's kind of hard to explain. If anybody's really ever experienced opening up their mind, then you know what I'm talking about. And really, I think why I want to put out these videos is to help people to have their own experiences. And you don't need to be high to have the experiences. You can have them through breathing meditation, and you can get really high through breathing. I've been looking my whole life for God. I've always been looking for God, and God has been right here talking to me. And even though God would talk to me and give me all these experiences, I would still, a lot of the times, sometimes make the wrong decisions. Doing things like living life, being into whatever you're into, and sometimes you can be into stuff too much. I have always had definitely an addictive personality, but I think it was me always chasing the experiences and being scared of them for a long time in my life, always being scared, like, whoa, this is like too much. But when I got a little bit older, I realized, hey, just relax, and it's God's plan to just go with it and experience it. Every day, the magic is happening everywhere and all around us. A lot of us are just not seeing it, not looking. If you ask, you will receive. And a lot of us are looking through a people. We think that we're seeing the whole picture, and we're seeing like we're seeing this much of the picture. There's so much more out there everywhere. And when you open up your third eye, you can start to see all kinds of things, and there's all kinds of experiences. When I start to tell my magic experiences, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, right, but I'm not making this stuff up. How could you even make this stuff up? It's really something that's inside of me, and it's inside of all of us. I would love for everyone to have good experiences, and I would love for everything to be good for everyone. I would love for everyone to have the best life and be blessed. I hope my stories help people and bless people. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea and think that, oh, we can go out and do a bunch of LSD and we're going to get these experiences. Well, I don't know if that's how it works. I don't think so, because I've known quite a few people that have done LSD, and it didn't do anything like that for them. But I know other people, like my dad and like his good friend Charlie Brown, that were heavy. They were like, my dad was like a yogi, Sonny, and everyone that knew him loved him. He was really a deep guy and a cool person. He had so many friends. Everybody who met him loved my dad. There was nobody who didn't love my dad. My dad's love in life was working on plants and working in his vegetable garden and playing music. He wanted to play music. That's what he wanted to do. That was his thing. And his yogi, Swami Satchidananda, told him that music was the highest meditation. So my dad was later in life started having bands and playing music and writing music. When him and my mom separated in the city right after the LSD happened, he told my mom, hey, I want to buy a school bus, take you and the kids, and I want to start going out and playing music, go on tour somewhere. He said, if I didn't choose to go to Northern California and live the life out in the country, he said, if I would have stayed and played music, he said, I would have been a rock star. And I'm sure he would have, because he started playing music and it was pretty good. He has some good albums that he played on, and he was the lead singer and he played guitar. But also he was an artist, making jewelry, making all kinds of things. And I'll tell stories about all the things he did and made, and was always constantly, he was a pretty hip guy. He was a cool man. And a lot of people know Sonny from San Francisco. He was really pretty famous. And with this, not famous like famous in that way, but everybody in San Francisco knew Sonny. A lot of people knew him and loved him. He actually went to school with Jerry Garcia out Balboa High School. Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. And he knew Jerry Garcia, and he knew a bunch of people. He also knew a bunch of other rock stars, and I'll start naming them, that were around in the 60s. He would go around and he would go to different concerts always, and he would take me, after the LSD experience at 3, he would start taking me with him everywhere, and we would go see all the different bands. Down by Ocean Beach, they used to have a place called Playland, and they had it was a big amusement park down by the Cliff House down there before Fly Shackers, where all the swimming pools were down there, down at the Cliff House. There used to be swimming pools down there, and there was a big amusement park down there, and he would go down there a lot, and there was music that played down there. There was a lot of famous people that played there, from all kinds of people, like I can't even name them all, but San Francisco was a real hub for all of the music, especially out of the Haight-Ashbury. After we went to Humboldt, and I lived there with them up until 8 years old, having a crazy magic life, I was there one day, and my dad looks at me, and it's just me and him, and we had some neighbors around the area. There's a lot of parcels that were in the area. There was a bunch of kids that I played with in the area. But one day my dad looked at me and he said, we're going to the city. And I said, what are we going to the city for? He goes, I need to go to the city and get a woman. And I go, okay. And I'm 8 years old. We go down to San Francisco, to Naylor, and my grandparents owned the house on the corner there on 2 Naylor, and we go see my grandparents, and my grandfather was Marsh, and my grandmother was Helen. They were from the Philippines, and they were American citizens in the American military in the Philippines. And when the Japanese invaded, my grandparents were running through the forest of Manila for 2 years. They were being chased by the Japanese. There was a $10,000 reward on my grandfather's head. And he was running through the jungle with his son, Bill, who was like, I think, I'm not sure exactly age, but close, probably about 10 years old, 12 years old. And his daughter, Katie, who was like 9 years old. And his son, Junior, who was like about 4 or 5 years old. And my dad, who was 1 year old. And they were being chased by the Japanese in the forest, and he had the whole family, and they were running because the Japanese planes would constantly come by and bomb, and they were running through the forest. My grandparents were very wealthy in the Philippines before the war. My grandmother had like 56 houses, and these were big estate houses. And my grandfather had like 13 houses. And when they married together, they had a bunch of houses. And these are not small houses. These are all are estates. But my grandfather told me when the Japanese invaded that he traded a giant mansion with pillars in the front and everything. And he had rows of like fancy cars. He told me he traded a giant mansion for a bag of rice this big. But I just wanted to tell a little bit about my grandparents. So they escaped when the American ships came to the harbor in Manila, and they made it to the ships, and the whole family came to the United States. And my grandfather came to the United States, and he worked at Sears Point. He was running the largest crane in the world for years. It was the largest crane up until they built another one that was bigger. But he worked at Sears Point at the military shipping yard, and my dad was, he went to Balboa High School, and my grandmother, Helen, she was a good woman, and she took care of the family. They were pretty scarred from the war. When they finally made it to the ship, the United States, they were skin and bones. And the whole family, all the kids were skin and bones. I remember my grandfather telling me that my dad, when he was 1 year old, they were running, and he had my dad in his arms, and he ran and jumped in a foxhole, and he was holding my father, and they were bombing, and the shrapnel covered my grandfather's back. Like, he had a bunch of shrapnel in his back, and he was holding my dad, and my dad had 2 pieces of shrapnel as a baby, and they almost lost him. But the experiences that they had were traumatic. War is traumatic, but my family comes from a crazy background. My grandfather's father was a courier for Teddy Roosevelt in the Philippines. So we have connection to the government. So my dad grew up in San Francisco, and he went to UCSF, and he graduated, and he got a degree in horticultural and botany. And after that, he got a job at Golden Gate Park as a gardener, and down at the end of Haight-Ashbury. And he also did a bunch of the work at landscaping and doing the Japanese tea garden down in San Francisco. He worked there and he did a lot of the landscaping there, and he was a gardener and he had a degree in plants, but he showed up at San Francisco back in the 60s at Golden Gate Park, and he was straight. He was clean cut. He was Ivy League. He was a frat boy from Marin County. He was in a fraternity over there, one of those fraternities over there. I can't remember the name offhand, but eventually I'll look it up and maybe give some of the information. But him and my mom met, and they got married. My mom was from Santa Clara, and she came from a large family, Catholic, and my grandmother was really Catholic on my mom's side, and she had a heavy story too. When she was 5 years old, her parents both got the Black Plague, and her sisters, maybe she was 6 or 7. I think maybe she was 6 or 7, and her little sister was 5, and the other sister was like 3. But there was 3 sisters, and they owned the biggest ranch in Taos, New Mexico. Our family was Spanish, and they bred with the Indians and were Spanish Indian. And her parents, my grandmother's parents on my mom's side, the Black Plague came and they both died in 2 days. And they were very well off, and they were meant to get it. It was one of the largest ranches in Taos, New Mexico. Is actually where the Taos, New Mexico ski resort is right now, and that whole mountain. And it was in a lawsuit for years, but because when my grandmother's parents died, all the family members showed up, and they sold everything and forged everything and took all of their assets, and they put them to work in the fields. They were supposed to be going to private schools, and they were supposed to have a different life. They put them in the fields, slaving in the fields at a young age. And my grandmother ran away at like 12 years old, and maybe 13. And she went out to Chicago, and she made money and got herself together. And when she had enough money, she went back to Taos, New Mexico, and she grabbed her sisters and she took them out of the fields, and she raised them at 16, both of them. And she was really religious. I mean, she was a Catholic. She went to church a lot, most of her life, 7 days a week. And she was really into God. But I'm going to get back to my story. So we go to San Francisco to my grandparents' house, and I'm hanging out with my grandmother and grandfather, and they were so good to me. Me and my grandfather were very close, and my grandmother, I mean, they treated me good. They were really special, and I'll tell more about them later on in my stories. But my dad went out one day, and he went to a bar down in San Francisco that his friend owned, and this is his first night out. He went out one night, and he sees a waitress, and he tips her a joint. And she was like, "Oh, this guy is weird." That's what she said. Anyways, he picks her up on their second date, and with her daughter, she had a little daughter that was like 3 years old, and at the time I'm 8, and he picks her up and he takes her and her daughter and me and him. We all drove up to Northern California, and he had her come stay in a little cabin. Not even a cabin, little lean tube shack. But when she seen it, she flipped out and she said, "No way." But he starts working on the property, and he, with my grandparents and my cousin John, they build a wooden water wheel down at the bottom of the creek below our house, and they get like metal roofing, and he makes a long sleuth, and he has a wooden water wheel with chains going around, and it pushes the water all the way up the hill, which is about a half mile up the hill. And my dad was pretty creative, and he built a lot of things. But next thing you know, we have water up at our little cabin. And then he starts to build a cabin, and he builds first he builds a 20 by 20, one story, and we all live in that 20 by 20. After about a year there, my stepmother's like, I can't take it here. And he also got a propane little gas stove, and so we're able to cook, and we have water. And he would warm up water on the little stove that he had, the Tin Wonder, and then we would warm up buckets of water on it with tin pans, and then we would like take cup baths. And this goes on for almost a year while my stepmom is there, and she's like, I cannot take this. We need to go back to the city. So my dad goes back down to San Francisco, and he's staying with my grandparents, and he becomes a San Francisco street artist. And he starts out making leather belts and leather things. He would make belts, mainly belts. He made a lot of belts, and that wasn't really making him the money that he needed to make it. So then he started making jewelry, and he's making prefab jewelry, and he's a San Francisco street artist down right below Ghirardelli, and that was one of the places where he would sell jewelry, and right below the cannery, right down at Fisherman's Wharf. And he starts making decent money doing jewelry, and he buys a house down in San Francisco, out in the avenues on 47th and Kirkham. And I start going to school down there. And actually before that, I was going to school next to my grandparents' house. I'm trying to think of the name of the school, but it was up, I'll think of the name, Francis Scott Key. I go to school at Francis Scott Key, and actually that's the second school that I go to out in the avenues, but the first school I can't think of offhand. But I go to school there, and I'm okay there, and I'm not getting in too much trouble there. But my stepmother starts really treating me bad, abusing me, and not physically, just mentally abusing me. I mean, she treats her daughter like gold, and she treats me like a stepchild, and it's kind of like the Cinderella story. But she does this for years, and for instance, she would take her daughter to go buy Nikes, and she would buy my clothes at Safeway, you know. That's kind of like just how it was. And I was pretty sharp. I picked up a lot of things when I was in San Francisco. When I was in third grade, they wanted to see how I was and if I had any damage from the LSD. So they tested me, IQ test, and in third grade, I tested 11th grade level mechanics, and mechanics is figuring stuff out. But I am pretty sharp and intuitive, and I can read things. But I was always telling my dad how she was abusing me, and he did not want to hear it. He loved this woman. She was the love of his, thought the love of his life. But after I tell the story later on down the road, you'll see how that turned out. But he was with her most of his life, and yeah, at the end it was pretty sad. But in the beginning, she was right there, and she was the perfect wife for him. She did everything. She cooked, she cleaned, she was um, everything that he wanted. But she was always abusing me, and that made me angry. So when I went to school at APG and Innie, um, I started getting in trouble. I was getting in trouble every out of 5 days a week. I got sent home 3 days a week for fighting